Welcome to Pete Wharmby. I'm Fergus Murray. I'm the chair of AMASE Autistic Mutual Aid Society Edinburgh. And Pete, would you like to introduce yourself, or shall I introduce you, or both?
I can introduce myself. That's fine. Hi, I'm Pete. I'm an autistic author. I suppose I could label myself that now. I used to be a teacher many years ago. Well, a few years ago now. And I also do a lot of talking, speaking, training, those kind of things. So that's my life. Talking about autism basically is just all I spend my time doing. So now I haven't got bored of it yet, so that's something.
That is good. Yeah, so you're the author of 2 books so far, and at least one chapter.
Yeah, 2 books and one random bonus chapter. Yes, yeah.
The books being Untypical, How the World Isn't Built for Autistic People and What We Should All Do About It. And what I want to talk about, how autistic special interests shape a life. And while I'm at it, the chapter is in this book, Learning from Autistic Teachers. How to be a neurodiversity inclusive school. And what's the chapter called, Pete? Do you know off the top of your head?
It's the very first one.
Special interests and their role in keeping the teacher in the classroom.
Indeed, yes, yeah. Didn't work for me in the end.
Didn't work for you in the end, but it worked for a while, right?
So it worked for 15 years. Yeah, very much
really
so.
Quite a long time. Yeah. So you became a teacher a few years before I did, then. Quite a few years before I did.
I guess so, yeah. I did my training back in, what would it have been, 2008, I think? 2007, 2008. Yeah. So, yeah, 15, 16 years ago now.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good place to start. What made you decide to become a teacher?
I don't know whether I did, if I'm honest with you. My life has always been very much kind of path of least resistance, because everything's so stressful. I've always found everything so enormously irritatingly tricky to navigate that I've just tended to go down quite literally the path of least resistance. I'm not even really using it as a metaphor. And becoming a teacher became a very straightforward call, because I got myself an English degree, and I didn't have a huge amount of imagination as to how I could go about using that. I wanted to be a writer, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. I was realistic, in that regard. I had nothing particularly to write about, and I knew it was very difficult to get into that world. And then I saw that I saw that the government was offering, at that point, a decent kind of sum to do your training. They were basically, that year or for that time period, they were basically kind of paying you a sort of wage just to do the training. And I thought, well, okay, I'd done a little bit of teaching in terms of, I worked for a first aid company back then in Lincoln, and I'd done some kind of first aid training delivery. So I had an idea. And my dad was an English teacher, and so it kind of felt like I'd absorbed it that way as well. So I just thought, well, that's a decent amount of money that they're offering. I might be able to do that. I'll give it a go and see how it goes. So it became more of a what's the word? A calling later. It did develop into something that I felt more strongly about. But to begin with, sadly, it was very much just kind of, okay, I'll do that kind of decision. Which, yeah. There we go.
When you got out of teaching, how much was that like a positive decision to devote your time to writing books, and how much of it was getting the hell out of that industry?
By that point I had really no choice, I think, to be honest. It was a very scary time. It was, of course, around COVID time that I finally left. I think I quit in April of 21. So it was just after the big lockdowns that everyone remembers. It was just after that period, and my mental health wasn't great, and I knew it wasn't going to get any better if I went back into the classroom. And I'd already ruffled feathers with the amount of time. A lot of autistic people will relate, amount of time I'd had off, being at the kind of limit of that, and as my kind of stress levels had increased over the last few years of my teaching career, my kind of organizational skills and everything had really kind of collapsed, and I was finding it very, very difficult to carry on. I really was surviving by the skin of my teeth, and it just felt like a matter of time, really. So I just had to bite the bullet and just say, you know what, I'd rather go on my own terms, and just try and make a new start for myself. And it was a relief, because, as I said in the chapter of the learning from autistic teachers, I think I talked about it in there. Every lesson was so stressful. Like, I'd get through a lesson, and obviously I was a secondary school teacher, so 5 periods a day, where I was. I'd get through a lesson, and then of course there'd be a new class coming along, turning up, and I would feel the same level of stress every time. Like, I never felt, oh, this is fine, I can do this. It always felt, this is impossible. How can I possibly do this? Every single lesson. And then they'd roll in, and I'd eventually, after 10, 15 minutes, I'd kind of get into the flow and I'd be okay. And then they'd go and I'd go through it all again. And, that's no way to live. That's...
You were always a full-time teacher in mainstream schools, right?
Yes. Yeah. I sometimes think, should I have to go back? Which is possible one day. The career of a writer is never set in stone after all. But if I were to have to go back, I'd have to consider a few different, like part-time or supply, or maybe specialist provision or something like that, which I think might suit me better. But of course, most of this time I didn't know I was autistic, so I just thought I was crap. I not
common experience.
I just thought I was, really feeble, I guess. I'm not saying that being autistic is to be feeble, but when you're autistic and you don't know it, that kind of level of self-hatred and, like despair at your own capability because you haven't got any insight into what's really going on is very strong. And yeah, I found it really, really distressing how I couldn't handle what other people appeared to be able to handle. All the time, of course, whilst masking, and all this turmoil going on, and nobody really even knowing that was happening, that I appeared fine.
Yeah. I mean, so many autistic adults have this experience, don't they? We just kind of assume that we're just a bit crap at almost everything. Apart from the few things that we're clearly very, very good at, which is just like bad at being human. And then you get your, you finally identify what the issues are, and then it kind of falls into place, and we maybe start forgiving ourselves some of that stuff.
Yes, and like I say, now I've got that information. If I were to have to go back into teaching, at least I would have that insight now, and I would know my limits. Limits and strengths, and just what works for me. So, like I say, a bit of part-time wouldn't be too bad, I don't think. I reckon I could just about manage that. But the idea of going back into full-time mainstream GCSE A-level English teaching.
Yeah, I feel lucky that I didn't go into teaching until I knew I was autistic. So I sort of went into it knowing that I was going to need to look out for, my limits, basically. And certainly the year of teacher training absolutely convinced me there's no way that I would be able to survive long in mainstream teaching, which I'm sure is a common autistic experience for autistic people who do try and go into teaching, which I think is more people than a lot of folks would imagine. Because for a number of reasons, like I don't know, for me, I bounced through various other jobs over the years, and a wide range of different things went wrong with perhaps some common threads. And then I finally realized that, if I faced the difficulties of teaching, of which there are obviously many, then that would be a reliable source of income, which would allow me to spend a lot of time explaining things that I'm fascinated by to sometimes
Yes.
an interested audience.
Yes, that's exactly it, you know, and like in the chapter of the book, you know, that's what I focused on. I remember vividly those days where I would get up with a bit more of a bounce in my step because I knew that I would be teaching something that I really loved. You know, obviously as an English teacher, I'm sure it's the same for you as well. It's science, isn't it? Do you deliver? Do you have to deliver all three of the, you know, biology, chemistry, physics?
Mostly not. So I am actually now doing a little bit of biology teaching again, but for the last, I don't know, 8-9 years, I've only been teaching. No, hang on, back up a little bit, because I also teach maths, and for about 5 years I wasn't teaching maths, which was sort of mostly better. There are things I love about maths, you know, there's a lot that I appreciate about it, but for the first 4 or 5 years of my teaching career, I ended up teaching maths to kids who didn't want to be learning maths and hadn't wanted to be learning maths for several years before I ever met them, right? So I always struggle with that. Like, I can enthuse people who are already keen on maths. I can like show them the bits that are actually fascinating, which you kind of need to get to a certain level to really appreciate. But so I've been teaching mostly just chemistry, which wasn't originally my subject, but is great fun to teach. And then physics, which is my real subject, and biology, where like, it's not my subject, basically. There are huge areas of biology that I am actually very, very interested in, but what we teach in school is mostly not any of that. There's a lot of biology, which is, you know, it's fine if you're into that kind of thing. And I see why it's interesting, but So I spend a lot of time teaching things which I am really very interested in and love it. But, sorry, my dog is calling at me. Hi, Kiffle. Hi, do you want to come up? This is Kiffle. Nice. Hi, Kiffle. What are we talking about? So I mean, education. I thought we should probably talk about how education is failing autistic people a little bit, both as children and as teachers, because we've obviously both been through that.
Yeah, like we did in Edinburgh back in February. my only memory of that is me basically saying we need to throw it all out and start again, because it's the longer it goes on, you know, I mean, here we are now, 10 months later, and I'm feeling even more strongly about that. You know, every I go into some schools, you know, I go into a fair number of schools to do training and talks and things like that, which is fantastic. You know, it's great that schools are looking for that kind of thing. They want to get autistic people in to talk to the staff, to talk to the students, and so on and so forth. And that is really encouraging. But so often I'm reminded, you know, when I'm kind of planning these talks, as to how difficult it might be to reach some of the staff, and how neurodiversity as a concept so widely embraced now by other parts of our culture and society. You know, it's getting to the point now. I mean, obviously, a lot of the time it's just lip service, but I mean, you know, at least it's still a conversation being had. You know, you get the world of business, even the NHS, for all its monolithic, you know, problems, it is at least seemingly trying to make an effort. You know, with things like the Oliver McGowan and the NATP, the corporate world. I mean, obviously, like I say, lip service, but they are, you know, in my experience, they're trying, you know, they are, I think, seeing the benefits of improving understanding of that stuff, but education just lags behind. There's no central kind of driving force behind anything, you know, like the D.A.V., for example. You know, the Department for Education isn't sort of, you know, sitting there going, right, we really need to improve every staff member's understanding. You know, there's nothing like that. It's down to little pockets of, you know, individual teachers or schools who want to improve things, and it scares the ever-loving life out of me, to be honest with you. You know, the number of kids that this, I mean, we're talking every human being in the country, you know, will go through that system. Autistic kids are going through the system and being traumatized by it, and non-autistic kids are going through the system not having learned they share the planet with people who think slightly differently to how they think. You know, which will then mean that they'll just go on to perpetuate all the old stereotypes and myths and blah blah blah. And you know, we're just kind of on this treadmill of staying still. You know, and I feel like these other organizations and bodies across the country, companies, NHS, colleges, even the police, etc., they can all do what they do, but nothing will really change until education is involved properly. Because ultimately, that's the one thing we all experience. You know, we won't necessarily all have run-ins with the police. We won't all necessarily go to university. We won't all necessarily go to work at a certain company that's taking diversity, you know, seriously. But we all go to school. And for every, I get very upset about this. Every week that goes by where the education system isn't really prioritizing this is another week lost. You know, another week of missed opportunity, missed potential, added trauma, all the bad stuff. You know, so yeah, some strong feelings on this subject.
Yeah. It's probably worth saying that the Scottish government, in Scotland, there is some kind of central push for more.
That's a fair point. Yes, I forget who I'm talking to. Yes, that's true.
But we constantly hit up against the fact that teachers are just overworked and like have no time in their schedule, and trainee teachers are expected to learn how to be a teacher in a year. All of which are, you know, also big reasons why the teaching profession is madly hostile to autistic people. You know, it is the same things basically. We just expect too much of teachers. There isn't enough space for learning, for exploring.
Yeah, exactly. And that all comes from the top. You know, that all comes from, you know, the systemic organization of of the whole, you know, education network, if you like. Yeah, I mean, looking back on my experience as a teacher, you know, we got no training at teacher training level back in 2007 about autism, I don't think. If we got anything, looking back, I think it was probably an afternoon or something very, very small. It certainly wasn't enough to kind of lodge in my memory, which I think it would have done if it had been quite impactful. Because quite honestly, if it had been really well done, I probably would have sat there and thought, this is interesting. You know, I can recognize some of this, and that might have been quite nice.
You know, talking to my fellow teachers, it's obvious that there's a huge amount of appetite for good training about autism and neurodiversity more broadly. Teachers are constantly struggling with the fact that we have kids in our classroom who are neurodivergent and are not okay. But yeah, it comes back to that just lack of space to actually learn about these things.
It does. But you know, the thing is that there are no simple solutions, because you know, we know that freeing time up for teachers is something that just doesn't happen. You know, I mean, I remember there being big fights back in 2008, 2009 in the school I worked at, where you know, we were being expected to cover during pretty much all of our free periods. You know, we'd have like 3 or 4 free periods a week if we were lucky. And the expectation was very frequently that we would be covering classes, you know, and as you know, covering a class is actually in many ways harder than teaching your normal class. You know, I'd much rather teach my normal English year 10 group or whatever than have to suddenly cover year 11 geography or something, you know, with kids that I've never met, where I haven't got that rapport, where therefore the behavior management is far more tricky, and you know, it's exhausting. I used to come out of cover lessons completely broken, you know, and that's a certainly it used to be, you know, even in the late even in the late 2010s, you know, when I was in the classroom, that was just an expectation. You know, you're going to do that and say goodbye to any time you had to, I don't know, read a book about autism or do some training, or you know, something you know, useful like that.
Short of tearing down the entire system and starting from scratch, do you think there are things which teachers could and should be doing in the sort of short to medium term to make life tolerable for neurodivergent kids?
It's very difficult to say, because having been a teacher and having been there, I know how kind of hollow much of what I could say might sound, you know, because I could say, for example, well, you know, get online, watch some videos by established autistic creators, who do really good stuff. And it's like, well, when? When do I do that? So on an individual teacher level, it's very, very difficult to feel like I'm even being fair to suggest things, because time is so tight. I mean, obviously that stands, if you do have a spare 10 minutes and you've got literally nothing else to fill it with, then I think a lot of good can come from online creators. I mean, obviously, I speak as one myself, and there's a lot of horror behind the whole thing, and there's a lot of stress behind it. But I found, learning so much just by kind of scrolling back in the day, Twitter, more recently things like Instagram, and you just kind of pick things up by osmosis when you're when you're following the right people. I find that you're just kind of, you're in a receptive zone because you're scrolling social media. But at least you're not wearing yourself out necessarily. You're just kind of being idle, and you're just, doing that nice kind of relaxing thing that I guess we all do now in 2023. But you kind of just gradually pick stuff up, I think, little snippets of info here and there. So there's something to be said for those that are time poor. That can be beneficial. Just having a quick scroll when you're on the loo in the morning. Not trying to suggest that people should be on their phones when they're on the toilet, but we've got to be realistic about our day. But the fact is, it all boils down to senior team and then the people above them. It's about prioritization. It's about where a school sets its main targets to be. I mean, I was a head of English for many years, and I know how that kind of tier of things works. And schools set their targets for a period of time, whether it's data led or to do with more pastoral things. They will have, very set measurable targets that they'll try and hit for themselves. And then they've got the targets that are kind of imposed upon them by the government or Ofsted or whatever body exists to manage them. And that, I think, is where it needs to be kind of inserted, at that level, so that there is, because the moment that a school sets out its stall that it's going to focus on X, Y, and Z for the next 5 years, and give these various targets the attention, and the twilight sessions and the training days and the kind of focus in terms of lesson observations and all that kind of thing. Just thinking from a very, very middle management kind of viewpoint. That, I think, is where real change could actually happen. And that would be really nice, because usually all of that stuff is really horrible. Usually these data targets and these 5-year plans are vile things that make you miserable. This could actually be something that's very workable, very doable, and would have really measurable positive impacts on everyone's life. But there has to be that will and there also has to be the space given, because, when you're trying to work out what your targets are going to be for the next however many years, everything is so predicated around numbers, data, exam results, attendance as well. I mean, God, if there's certainly in England at least, there's such a focus and fixation on attendance, but there's no interest in what leads to bad attendance. There's no curiosity about what's actually going on there. It's just, attendance is bad, you are punished, kind of really ludicrous, no nuance at all. If they actually just took us back and thought, okay, one way that you could really improve attendance, in my personal opinion, is making school more amenable to autistic and otherwise neurodivergent kids. Because let's face it, we're the ones that used to take days off. I don't know about you, but I did, because it was a blooming nightmare. It was horrible going into school every day, and having no support and no one understand and no one even recognize it of you, of course.
I do think that a lot of the things that we could be doing to make school more tolerable for autistic people would also make it a much more pleasurable experience for kids in general.
Yeah,
absolutely. Self-directed learning, autonomy, flexibility, but these things take resources, right? So what can you do?
They can take resources, but a lot of it doesn't. The problem for a lot of it is that it would require a wholesale, very conscious move away from traditional ways of doing things. And by traditional ways of doing things, I don't really want to wade into the conversation about, progressive teaching versus trad teaching. I mean, I don't even know whether that argument's still going on. It certainly used to during the 2010s. Because even progressive teachers are still locked in the system they're in. I don't know, a lot of the narratives and systems that exist within schools exist for the sole reason that they always have existed.
Mm.
And there's just an assumption that because they've always been around, at least in some form or another, then they must be kind of okay. They must sort of work in some way. And I know I'm veering alarmingly into the whole tear it all down and start again territory. I do understand that. But, an example that I could give here is I often mention when I'm talking to parents and teachers about motivation and rewards for autistic kids. And the fact that too often autistic kids are gifted or given their passionate interests as a reward, which totally misunderstands the whole nature of what's going on there. And actually, I did something about this on Instagram the other day, and somebody replied with such a brilliant analogy. I can't remember who it was, so I can't credit them directly, but somebody put a reply saying, it would be like telling somebody on their way to work, you're not allowed your morning coffee until after you've been to work.
Right.
And I thought that was brilliant. That's such a perfect analogy for it. But the idea of giving an autistic child, for example, the thing they enjoy most in the world before getting them to do the coursework or before getting them to do the task is so fundamentally at odds with the established system that it would barely even occur to anyone to even consider it, let alone put it into place.
Yeah.
And I think it's that kind of thing. The thing is, that would be free. I'm not, just the example giving, like before you get an autistic child, for example, who's really struggling with a task in a particular subject, you let them do some drawings or something that they love first, just for 10 minutes or something. I'm spitballing here, but bear with me. And then when they've managed to center themselves and maybe deal with some of that stress and maybe, self-regulate a little bit, thanks to, getting something out of themselves, special interest related, then they might be able to tackle the task. I know that I can when I do that. That certainly works for me. That wouldn't cost a thing. That wouldn't be expensive either in terms of time or money. But it won't happen because it's too far removed from the established norms of what happens in a classroom.
Yeah.
And I think when I talk about tearing the whole thing down and starting again, I think actually really what I'm saying a lot of the time is just take a step back for a moment with fresh eyes, look on the situation, look at how it's all set. Just think, does it all have to be this way? Does everything have to continue? I don't know. I'm asking too much. I'm being idealistic as always, but
But yeah, so much of the problem is like philosophical, basically, right? It's the underlying ideas and values that are embedded throughout the whole thing. So yeah.
Yes, yeah. There's the whole issue. I mean, I'm not the person to talk to about schools being all about conformity for capitalism and stuff. You want someone like Robert Chapman for that, who I think would be great at that kind of thing. But I do think that that whether it's conscious or not, the conformity that schools expect is obviously always going to inherently affect autistic kids, ADHD kids, dyspraxic kids, etc., etc., etc. It's always going, and indeed pretty much any other minority group of children you can possibly imagine. And the question has to be big question mark that should hang over everything is, does conformity even is that something that we should be chasing? And obviously it's not. Obviously it isn't. It may well have been back in 1880. It may well have been very useful in 1942. But quite frankly, the way the world works now, if we want the human race to thrive and succeed, which I assume we must sort of want to do, then we might have to seriously rethink that, because conformity is not getting us anywhere. It's not achieving anything good at all.
No, historically, we still seem to be on a trajectory. Maybe we've just about got off it. I don't know. But, for the last 150 years or so, we've been expecting more and more conformity and building in like rewards for conformity deeper and deeper into the whole economic system and the education system. Oh, yeah. So
we always have fun when we get together and talk education.
and this sort of loops around in a way to monotropism, which I wanted to talk about.
Yes.
Because your book, what I want to talk about, is probably the first book since When Lawson's A Passionate Mind that mentions monotropism on the first page.
Yes.
Which is, lovely to see. I wondered I don't know. Do you remember how you first heard about the theory?
About monitor. Oh, goodness me. To be honest, it would have been Twitter, obviously. It was probably you. To be honest, I really can't remember. I didn't know about it when I was diagnosed. I do
Right.
know that.
Mhm.
I remember very vividly, when I was diagnosed as Asperger's somehow. I still don't really know why that happened because it was 2017 and I really shouldn't have been.
The
But I,
ICD was still using Asperger's, I think, until like 2 years ago or something. So
oh, okay. Well, that makes more
yeah,
sense. I thought it had meant to have been kind of phased out before then. Maybe I was thinking about America.
yeah. So
But
the
anyways,
UK uses a mix of diagnostic manuals.
we do. Yes,
Yeah,
we
whereas
do.
the US just has the DSM. We have
DSM.
the DSM
Yes.
and
Yeah,
the
indeed.
ICD, so it all depends where you go. And
Yeah, yeah, indeed. So when I first got the diagnosis, my understanding, I was only just figuring out things like masking, the fairly basic concepts. I was sort of getting my head around and realizing and going, oh my word, that makes sense. Um, the whole idea of monotropism didn't come up for me for a while. I don't think it must have been, the next year, like 2018 or something like that, where I started to become aware of it. I was very aware of the topic of interest, because that was one of the primary ways that I realized and recognized in myself, because I knew that I had these, passionate fixations and that had driven me throughout my life, and how powerful they were and how beneficial they were to me. So I was very aware of that side of things. And I was also very aware of things like flow and task switching difficulties, but I didn't know why or what they were, and I didn't know how they all linked together, but I'd certainly experienced them. So whenever it was that I came across it was another one of those moments, like when I first read about masking, or I think I learned as camouflaging to start with. How the terms vary. The moment that I came across this was a real, moment of, oh my word, this I could tell this was something that certainly fit me personally incredibly well. It explained a lot.
yeah, sorry, I'm realizing that we're talking to each other as people who know what we're talking about. There probably are people watching who have no idea what monotropism is. Would you like to briefly summarize it, or shall I?
Oh, you can. I feel like a fraud doing that. You feel free.
Yeah, so it's basically the idea that there are people, including certainly the vast majority of autistic people, whose brains tend to focus our attention and our processing resources on a smaller number of things at a time. Our interests pull us in more strongly than other people, and usually it's harder to sort of pull us out of our attention tunnel, and things coming in from outside to pull us out of our attention tunnel tend to be experienced as very disruptive.
Yes.
Pretty much sums up. So a lot of it's about interests,
Yeah.
and intense interests, which is of course the whole theme of what I want to talk about, which is why it makes sense to bring in monotropism on the first page.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's obviously that's not all that it's about. It's a theory of why autistic people are like this in general, really.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. And I like the idea of it being, this potential for really explaining things in this very non-pathologizing way. That it is very much, look, everyone, different people have different ways of attending to things, in ways that you may never have imagined, and there's nothing wrong with this. There is nothing bad about it. There is nothing inherently negative about this whatsoever. It is simply a difference that has, that's just taken a while to be noticed. Or actually, even that's not quite right. I think we've always known that there are people like that. You can't. The thing that gets me is you can't move in the media landscape. You can't move for characters that are coded autistic.
Right.
They're literally everywhere.
Yeah,
In fact, I'm starting to genuinely believe that. Don't quote me on this, and this is very much off the record, really. I'm not going to officially, kind of come out. But I feel like whenever writers, script writers, whoever they may be, creating characters, whenever they want to make a character more interesting, they dive into the big box that could be labeled autistic traits. It's not labeled that. it's just like a big box of traits that are labeled interesting, but realistically they're actually just autistic traits. Let's dive into there and pick some things out. Okay, so they're a bit unusual in their speech, they're a bit awkward in conversation, but also really nice and lovable when you get to know them, or they're really fascinated in certain topics, or they're quite eccentric, or they're this, that, and the other. It's everywhere. You can't move for it. I think that's why there's such a lot of people that kind of, on social media and stuff, that kind of watch a TV show or watch a film or read a book and think, oh my God, they're autistic. And it's like, well, I can kind of see where you're coming from, because they have these, very particular traits. It feels to me like the human race has always known that we're here. That there are autistic people around, and that autistic people have a certain way of looking at the world, which could be deemed as different or eccentric or quirky, or whatever label you want to attach to it. But it's just never kind of committed to it and taken the time to figure it actually out. It's just kind of taken that kind of face value thing and just thought, okay, yeah, there's interesting people around. I don't know. I am really spitballing now, so do bear that in mind. This isn't necessarily really well thought out stuff. It just really interests me. I'm fascinated by the media representation of autism. I really am.
Yeah. And the way that so many of the stories that we grow up with are about these characters with intense interests and total devotion to causes, and like an extremely strong sense of what's right and what's wrong, and inability to fit in, and how that's okay, really. And then like we exist in society, like,
not okay.
What are you doing, you massive weirdo? Why do you care so much about stuff?
I've always thought that the world would be a much better place if the ugly duckling was simply an ugly duckling, rather than growing up into a blooming swan, as if to say, don't worry, everyone who's a bit weird and awkward, you'll eventually be a beautiful swan. No, you won't. You'll eventually be you, and that's fine. That's fine. You don't have to be. I mean, that's one of those stories that really has done harm. But so many other stories, like you say, actually celebrate the people who have a different way of looking at the world. And but because society's never put two and two together, we are in real life still ostracized.
Like taking at face value, so many stories are about weird pride. They're about people who are really very peculiar, learning that it's actually okay to be peculiar. But we don't, as a society, we don't follow through on that message. So.
No. Well, it's like neurodiversity being used as a lip service term by business. It's the same kind of idea. It's like, we like the idea of it and we'll talk about it. We won't actually do it. We won't actually like live up to the ideals. I mean, that feels to me like it is quite a human thing. The we as a species might be prone to. Perhaps I don't know.
Probably fair. I guess on the topic of autistic weirdos with very strong feelings about what's right and what's wrong. I love the section in your book, Untypical, about autistic people in politics, and Greta Thunberg's intense, hyperfixation on the climate and justice, and how we're obviously going horribly wrong. And you have quite a sort of positive, upbeat message there. I just wondered if the ascent of Elon Musk has at all changed the way that you think about this.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, ultimately, of course, as we always have to say, one person doesn't signal the whole thing. You're always going to have people who go. Ultimately, I think that if there is a strong tendency towards, this kind of strong need for justice, that autistic people have, and whatever drives that, I mean, it could even be monotropism, the kind of single-minded focus, this is wrong and this isn't fair and this needs to change. I think it's fair to suggest that could go either way. You could, it's like, look, it's like superheroes, right? You've got Iron Man, you've got Dr. Doom. Okay, Iron Man and Dr. Doom, both different sides of the same coin, really. Geniuses. I'm not by any means saying that either are more autistic coded. I'm not really into that with superheroes particularly. But all I'm saying is that Dr. Doom, for example, has a very strong reason and feeling for why he does what he does. If you're familiar with the comics, he does what he does because he genuinely believes that he's the only person that can save mankind. And I think at one point it's even proved right that he actually really is the only person who can save mankind, which kind of muddies the water even more. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that if you have that very strong feeling, but it happens to be misguided, and you have an enormous amount of power somehow through money, connections, networks, whatever, then obviously things can go horribly awry. Whereas if it does happen to be, you know, a focus and a seeking of justice that actually is beneficial, then it goes the other way. Because, you know, it certainly seems to me that Musk was initially driven by a slight misunderstanding of what free speech is. I mean, I can't say for sure. I don't really want to go into it too much, but that seems to have been his guiding thing for at least for a time, and it's taken him down a very, very dark path, as it has quite a few people, I think. You know, thinking that we should be allowed, you know, to be able to say whatever we want whenever we want without consequence, which seems to be the misreading that tends to happen. And here we are, you know, not on Twitter anymore. And you know, whereas, you know, Thunberg or Chris Packham, for example, with his focus on, you know, his you know, dedication to issues to do with conservation and animal life in the UK, you know, again, a very similar kind of single focus, and, you know, you know, I feel very strong about this. I'm pushing through, and everything is secondary to this one thing, but less misguided perhaps, and therefore not causing any harm and maybe even causing good. It's like a laser beam that has the capacity to destroy or to build, just firing, you know, it could fire in either direction. Who knows which way it's going to go, you know, and it will just depend on the nature of the person and their belief system and things they you know, things they may know well or things they might have misunderstandings of, and etc., etc., etc. It's a murky thing, though. It is. So yeah, my optimism, it's not tempered too badly. I still think that if it is indeed a trait, if it is indeed a very, you know, real thing, then it could lead to tremendous change and good stuff, potentially, you know. But there is always going to be that possibility of things going awry.
Yeah. I'm just sticking with the topic of Twitter. Obviously, we sort of first interacted on there. We both have sunk many hours of our lives into what was once a thriving autistic community on there.
Yes. Yeah.
Essentially destroyed on a whim by the most powerful autistic person in the world, which is,
there's a real horrible irony to it, isn't there?
There is, yeah. Yeah, so now that we've sort of given up on Twitter, I'm curious about how your experience there compares with other things. So, you know, you would write these sort of relatively long threads on Twitter as far as Twitter goes, but obviously you've been writing books which give you way more space. And I was wondering, you know, do those experiences compare? Are they just totally different, or?
They're totally different, really. I liked what I found from writing the books and what I found from writing longer form on Patreon or on LinkedIn in particular, where, you know, you can go into a bit of depth. You know, there's still a word limit, but it's not too bad. Is that there's that, you know, amount of nuance that you can explore, because unfortunately it's really interesting. It's like so much about being autistic can be reduced down to a kind of soundbite. And we've all seen that happen. You know, autistic influencers and creators have got popular for that very reason, I think. You know, because we're talking about human perception and the human way of looking at the world. And I mean, you know, ultimately, that's what comedy is. So there's a ripe market for people. You know, people want to hear about people's different perception of things. You know, we find humor in it. We find what's the word, relatability, we find togetherness, we find all kinds of very powerful things. But because of that, you know, doing it in only short snips, you know, like tweet length bits of information, obviously by design then a lot is being missed out. And it was something I always wrestled with back when I was on Twitter. You know, I would agonize horribly over, God, am I misrepresenting something? Am I like erasing people with this tweet? Am I risking generalizing in a very harmful way? You know, et cetera, et cetera. And occasionally, of course, you get called out for it, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," and I'd feel dreadful. I wouldn't tweet for a week, you know, because I just felt so guilty about it. Whereas longer form, there's more space to be a bit clearer about, you know, what you're actually saying and what the point is. And I found a lot of joy in that. Similarly, though, on Instagram, I've taken to doing, again, like shorter, pithier bits of information, but I've learned from experience that it's okay to do that, and it's safe to do that, so long as those pithy bits of information are either factual, you know, or as factual as we can make them, or very obviously personal, you know, or a kind of topic discussion opener, so everyone can just kind of pile on in the comments, and it's very clear that that's the case, you know. And I found a lot more peace in that. I mean, I found that the Twitter community was lovely, but because Twitter was like a wide open prairie where everyone had a sniper rifle, and your material that you put on there was hyper visible, especially if you had a fair few followers, and you had to have thick skin to be able to deal with it. I think Twitter only works if you're pretty resilient, and that is not me. I am not resilient. I have no resilience at all.
And yeah, the more followers you get, the more resilience you need, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
I'm quite conscious that you had like 75,000 followers there, which is quite a few times as many as I ever had. And I think your experience was very different as a result.
Yeah, it was. You know, you just knew that any moment that you tweeted something, there would be some form of backlash from someone somewhere. No matter how careful you tried to be, no matter how like conscious of the dangers that you were. And that would almost make it worse, because you'd be like, I've done everything I can in this short tweet to recognize that this is my view, and I'm not speaking for everyone, and you know, that other autistic creators are available, and other flavors of autism do exist, and so on. But I'd still get the flack.
Yeah, I know, it's incredible to me how much hedging you did, how careful you were on that, and how much backlash you still got.
And I'd sometimes get quite upset if I'm going to be really candid. I sometimes get quite upset because I didn't necessarily see other autistic accounts with big followings getting the same kind of level of. I don't know what was doing wrong. It was really weird.
Yeah, I couldn't make sense of it. Like, yeah, you had, you know, I don't know, 10 times my followers or something, but you got definitely way more than 10 times as much flack as I did. So,
I think once you reach a certain threshold, people stop viewing you as a human being, and they start viewing you as something else. I'm not quite sure what, to be honest with you, but something else, you know, and therefore feel a lot happier in just like, you know, attacking you and your family kind of thing, you know, just like really brutal kind of trolling behavior. I guess that's just the nature of the beast, but I'm much happier out of that. You know, I found that Instagram and LinkedIn are much more relaxed places. I mean, I've got my reservations about LinkedIn, don't get me wrong. I hate the kind of, you know, there are certain pockets which are very ableist and very, you know, disability inspiration porn kind of things going on, and you know, it can be a bit gross, but you know, there's a nice little kind of thicket that I'm in where everyone seems quite pleasant, and there's a lot of Twitter refugees, probably not the right word to use, to be honest. It diminishes the reality, but certainly people that have been displaced off of Twitter have gone there, and it's, you know, it's not too bad really, and the conversations don't get as heated, and there's not as much bad blood, there's not as much kind of inherent instant negative interpretation. You know, people give you the benefit of the doubt a bit more, I think. And Instagram, because Instagram's very nature isn't really built around conversations or comments that much, it doesn't feel as dangerous in that regard, you know. And also my feed is just filled with model trains, Lego and castles and stuff, which is, you know, a huge improvement for my quality.
Which I did want to talk about, actually, you know, speaking of, you know, being a human.
Yes.
Yeah, any favorite Lego sets? Anything you're looking forward to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm surrounded by other stuff. I don't know if you can see, but I mean, I've got my Lego Titanic there, which is obviously a favorite. But I mean, my favorite is probably the Ghostbusters headquarters just there. Because when that came out, it felt like Lego were directly trying to tap into my brain in some horrible, insidious way. Because it was like, two of my most potent special interests, they were just kind of merging together in this very dangerous way. And it was like, give us all of your money, Pete. This kind of thing. It's really creepy. And then they did it again with the Titanic, of course. And I'm just petrified. What are they going to do next? What's the next thing going to be? Are they going to do they've already done Lego Sonic the Hedgehog, but luckily those sets were quite cheap. Thank God. So it's an ongoing hobby of mine, obviously.
Yeah, and the trains.
But
So you mentioned trains in particular, and you've been designing your own Lego train sets.
yes, that's my real passion these days. Sadly, they're downstairs on the windowsill in the lounge because they're so awesome. That's where they deserve to be. So I haven't got them here, but
people can go and find them on your Instagram and whatever, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll find them easily enough because I keep talking about them. But there's a joy for me in it's the whole point of Lego, isn't it? You can make your own stuff. So designing my own, because to be quite frank, the trains that Lego comes out with, they're not great. They're the scale's all off, and they're just they're lovely for toys and great for kids to have go around on a track and everything, but Lego is such a wonderful toy in terms of potential that you want to use your full range of bricks and elements to make the perfect representation of your favorite trains. And I put hours and hours and hours and hours into designing for anyone who knows trains, an A4 Pacific LNER, like Mallard, the fast steam train with the rounded front.
Right.
It's basically one of those. And it appeals to me because there's a lot of problem solving involved. You've got to get it to because it's got to run on the track. It's got to be workable. So the wheels, to put it bluntly, the wheels have to spin. The front and back bogies have to be flexible so you can go around corners and stuff like that. And it's not easy to make it work and look good at the same time. It's a real balancing act. And that for me, the problem solving of that for me was just wonderful. Trying to figure out how can I make it look like this but have the space to be able to allow this kind of movement. And I don't know, it's fantastic.
I know that Lego's had quite a lot of negative response to their new Orient Express set because it doesn't really run.
Oh God, people are furious. Absolutely furious. I don't care about motorization because I lost interest in motorization when they made it battery related. All Lego trains these days. It used to be that they were like Wharmby. The track was metal and it was electrified, and the trains weren't themselves powered. They ran on powered track. That's how, in my opinion, it should be. Everything should be able to be plugged into the mains, in my opinion. I don't like battery operated toys. So I don't care too much about powering up my trains, but I do want them to be able to go around corners at the very least. I do need them to be able to do that because I want to be able to, if I'm going to be perfectly frank with you, I want to be able to get on the floor and push them around, because that's what they're for. But yeah, the community they were livid about the Orient Express, and before that, they were really angry about the big Hogwarts Express that they made as well, which was a wonderful model, beautifully designed, really looked like a real steam engine, but it's not to scale for the tracks that we have. It's like, well done, Lego. That's really sensible. Make a train that literally won't run on the tracks that you produce. I don't know what they were thinking. I really don't.
So I guess we're nearly out of time. Any future plans that you would like us to know about, be it Lego or books or anything really?
Yeah, in terms of writing, I've been very, very slow in getting my next book proposal sorted out. This year's been quite full on. I would have liked to have had it sorted by now, but I'm just getting the proposals put together with my agent at the moment. But as you can probably imagine from my earlier rant, it's going to be focused on education. I don't know whether there's a mass market appeal there. In many ways, I don't really care that much. I feel like I want to take chapter 5 of Untypical and blow it up, into a full book that's useful for teachers, parents, higher levels of staff, in schools, kind of SLT and above, councils, Senkos, everyone. That's the aim anyway. And then a kind of sister publication on employment. So basically,
Okay.
2 books on the 2 topics that, for whatever reason, I seem to have just kind of landed upon. You know, these are the 2 things that I spend most of my time talking about and writing about. So it makes sense for my next books to be, you know, focused on those things. And then one day fiction, I will. You know, I'm in the zone now. You know, I've got an agent. I'm an author. I'm published. So finally, maybe that dream I had as a teenager of being a fiction, you know, proper, you know, not proper writer, but you know, a novel, a paperback writer,
Yeah.
as Paul McCartney would no doubt say. Um, Maybe I'll be able to go into that somehow. I don't know how, but it'd be fun. You know, it's a dream.
Speaking of speaking, you've
Yes.
got a series of webinars starting in January.
Yeah, that's a new thing for
Cool.
me. I'm not great at. I'm going to really sell it, by the way. Here, I'm an excellent salesman of my own products. Um, I'm a terribly disorganized person, so I've always been quite reluctant and worried about putting my own things on because obviously it requires a level of, you know, organization that does scare me a bit. But you know, 2024, fresh new year. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna give it a go. So I've got a load of things booked in. You can just go to my website if you want to see the details. They're booked via Eventbrite, obviously, because that's what people use for this kind of thing. But all the dates and the topics are on Eventbrite and on my website. So feel free to have a look. If they work and if they go well, I'd like to make it a really regular thing and just have it kind of running through the year. Some free, some ticketed, you know, because I've got to try and earn a living somehow. And yeah, you know, just kind of it's an opportunity to have things that are a bit more, you know, discussion-y, you know, Q&A like this, for example. You know, I mean, I can talk, obviously, as long as I want, but it's nice to have an opportunity for people to ask questions and for us to have a bit of a conversation and, you know, learn some new stuff from people and just keep it nice and open and chatty and friendly and nice.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Pete. It was good to
No problem at all. Thank you very much.
And best of luck with the webinars and the writing and all of that.
Yeah, indeed. And yeah, I hope everyone has a good holiday period and Christmas or whatever it might be that you celebrate over the time. And yeah, happy 2024 when it eventually, well, I say eventually, I mean, it's going to be here any blooming minute, isn't it? You know, time, it's just, you know, wake up tomorrow. It's like, oh, it's January the 1st. Oh, right.
Yeah,
Okay, fair enough.
what happened to time? I feel like it used to
We're just
run.
getting old. We're just getting old, I think.
Maybe it's just
There's that whole thing, isn't there? That the older you get, the shorter a proportion of your life the year takes up. It's like when you're 8.
and the more of the things you've done are things you've done before,
Exactly.
often
So it's
hundreds
just
of times.
a
So
churn.
yeah.
So yeah, that's it. You know, it'll be 2040 by before we know it, and who knows what the world will be like.
Yeah.
But anyway,
So
on
we'll
that
probably
happy
have
note,
you in for another chat about your next book, you know, in a couple of weeks or something.
yeah, probably yes.
All right. Bye for now.
Anyway,
Pete.
yeah. Cheers then, everyone. Bye bye.